Hi everybody, Kathy Syret from the Confident Leader Journey here. And what we're looking at here basically are dimensions of leadership that can make a difference to us in the quality of leadership we provide and how the people who choose to follow us feel about having us as a leader, but also about our internal confidence when we're leading. And one of the things I'd like to talk about in this video is about how as leaders we can influence the learning in our organization or among our team. Now, I talked about growth mindsets, fixed mindsets before. So let's first start off with what we're talking about with learning. And when I'm talking about learning, I'm talking about not about the stuff that, well, I think Carl Ransom Rogers says it best. He says, I want to talk about learning, but not the lifeless, sterile, futile, quickly forgotten stuff that is crammed into the mind of the poor, helpless individual, tied into his seat by ironclad bonds of conformity. Yep, that's how I felt in some training programs. I'm there because I have to be there. It's just an information dump. And to be honest, e-learning is even worse. Okay? So Carl Rogers goes on to say, I'm talking about learning, the insatiable curiosity that drives the adolescent boy to absorb everything he can see or hear or read about gasoline engines in order to improve the efficiency and speed of his own car. I'm talking about the student who says, I am discovering, drawing in from the outside and making that which is drawn in a real part of me. I'm talking about any learning in which the experience is, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I need. Aha, here it is. Now I'm grasping and comprehending what I need and what I want to know. Wow, what a description of learning. As leaders, it's our role to try and create the environment where that form of learning is happening, not the sterile, futile one that happens in classrooms and workshops where people go because they have to, and it's a tick box exercise. So what can we do to create this? What we're aiming for, and the book I'm going to refer you to in this one is Paul Matthews' book, Informal Learning at Work. Okay, because what we're talking about here is not it's not just about having an LMS. It's not about having a learning and development department. This is about how can we embed learning within the organization so that it's not a formal structure or a formal process, but it's informal and it happens naturally. Okay. Now, it's interesting because I was in a meeting recently, and someone said to me, if you're going to be here, if you were in a company coming in as a trainer or head of learning and development, and you're going to be here 4 or 5 years, what would you want your legacy to be? And I said, I want my legacy to be that when I leave, you don't need to replace me because the role is no longer necessary. So then they kind of went, well, what do you mean? We're always going to need a head of L&D. It's like, are you? Or can we create a culture and systems and processes that instead of learning and development being something that is created up here and then spread down and out in the organization, it's something that's actually created at the point of need and driven by the people who want to learn. Now, this is about turning things upside down, and I realize that. But a lot of leadership is about that. If you think about it, some of the original leadership theories were all about telling people what to do. Are we leading the task? Are we leading the people? But we're the ones making the decisions. And over time, those have changed. And the current leadership models are more around servant leadership. Whereas a leader, I'm there to serve the people that I'm leading. Or even distributed leadership, which is something that's very developing very strongly and building very strongly in the educational sector, where you can't have a pointers ahead making all those decisions. You actually want to have leadership distributed to where those decisions have to be made. And in fact, this goes back to a lot of Richard Hackman's work on if you want a self-managing team, what you need to create are the boundaries within which that team can work and then let them get on with it. And that gives them power, empowerment, control, but the boundaries are what give you safety. So let's say a simple boundary could be the budget that they're allowed to spend. A simple boundary could be how they can solve a problem, not by spending money or gifting people things, but by actually solving the problem. But they have freedom to do that. So within that sandbox of boundaries, they have freedom to act. So these are now the models of leadership we're working with, very different from the directive ones we were working with before. So it's hardly surprising that we're now looking at some equivalent differences within learning and development. Now, if we look at Stella Collins' book about the neuroscience of learning, one of the things she points out is a lot of the science behind learning isn't necessarily followed by people who develop and impose learning programs. However, it does tend to be intuitively followed or put in place when teams themselves are putting together how they want to learn. And a lot of that is about learning by doing and is very similar to the informal learning process. So here's the thing, one of the underlying assumptions of informal learning is that it happens all the time. We are always learning stuff. And our role as a leader is to create an environment where what we are learning is something that's useful for the company, useful for the team, and useful for us. Because we will be learning. Anybody who's studied any leadership knows that there's a whole set of informal norms in an organization. So whatever the official rules are, what actually happens on the shop floor and on the front line is based much more on those informal structures and rules that everybody has. And it's the same thing with learning. We are learning all the time. So if I want to buy a new photocopier and I go and look on the internet and I find a few and I review them and then I come back, I'm learning. I'm learning how to find out a new photocopier. Now, I might be able to tweak that if I talk to someone with more experience. So that's where maybe some ideas and resources could be added into the process to make it even better informal learning. But I'm not going on a program or a workshop to learn how to buy a photocopier. I'm learning it by doing it. Okay? So basically with formal learning, somebody else sets the objective and the process. With informal learning, it's much more, it happens organically. Something crops up that we'd like to learn about. And that's when learning and development becomes a resource to facilitate that process rather than the director, decision maker and director of the process. So if we think about this in terms of what it means for us as leaders, okay, I suppose one of the questions for me is, which of the leadership models best works with the informal learning? Okay. And it is the challenge of what type of leader do you want to be? Where are you most comfortable? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? And if you're aware of all these different approaches to leadership and the importance of those informal systems and structures and negotiations between people for learning and developing and changing things, what does that mean for us in terms of how we lead our organizations to make changes, to implement changes, to even choose which changes to make? And how does that affect our confidence as leaders? So for me, one of the key characteristics of the more modern leadership models is the idea of letting go. The old leadership models were very much focused on control and direct. What we're focused on now is much more about letting go of that need for control and focusing on facilitating and enabling. Okay? So we might create resources which would help people achieve their goals. We would facilitate the discussions around learning and development to help them do that. Okay? But what we're looking for is that it's driven and controlled by the people themselves. And this is a very different model. And I think it could be one reason why it is quite challenging to be a confident leader in today's world. Because the great thing about control is I can measure you, you're at your desk at 9, you leave at 5, I know you're there, I can measure that, it's clearly visible. It's very clear cut. But with the modern leadership, it's much more down to less clear cut measures. How do we evaluate that it's working? And we have to trust the process. So as leaders, we ourselves have to feel confident that this is going to work. So my recommendation to you would be look into things like informal learning. Read up on servant leadership. Read up on distributed leadership. Get yourself up to date with some of these modern ways of thinking about leadership and see how they fit with your values, your beliefs, and the way you lead. And think about how you can combine those to increase your ability to be a confident leader. Okay, it's Kathy Syrett from the Confident Leader Journey. Find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called the Confident Leader Journey Community. And there is a website which we'll be updating shortly called confidentleaderjourney.com. Hope to see you in one of those places. Take care.